Great, thanks very much. Continuing with the theme of tyres for this section of the presentations today, we're going to go back to a Zoom presentation this time. We've got Liam O'Keefe, who is the Senior Strategy Manager for Tyre Stewardship Australia, giving us a bit of a presentation on a business case for tyre processing in the NT. So just checking that Liam is there. Hey.
I'm here. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, we can. You're a little bit dark with the lighting behind you, but that's fine if you're happy with that.
That's mood lighting. It's probably better you can't see. Really.
Well, we'll give you a tropical round of applause to welcome Liam up there.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks for the introduction. First off, I'd just like to say I'm here with Nathan from Urban EP, who will talk a little bit more later in the presentation. But firstly, we would say that we would love to be there. We intended to be there. We were meant to arrive on Monday and be visiting a few sites and visiting Alice Springs and alike and doing some work in the region. But we're in Victoria and Melbourne for reasons that we're all well aware of. I did a presentation remotely last year with the intent of being up there this year, but it hasn't eventuated that way. But what I would say is through presenting and talking to Meredith and Peter and the team up there, we've made some progress in terms of the work that TSA is doing in the region, and we have some progress and which we'll talk about a little bit later. But I'll just share my screen if I can, and just to. Is that coming up appropriately for you? Is that?
Yeah, that's coming up for us. Yeah.
Yep, great. So yeah, thanks again. As I said, we'd love to be there. Had intended to come up and visit, but circumstances haven't allowed that to be the case. But yeah, my name's Liam O'Keefe, Senior Strategy Manager at Tyre Stewardship Australia. Been at TSA for about 6 years since we started in 2015. Today we'll be talking just a little bit about TSA, a bit of background for those who haven't heard of us or weren't paying attention last time I presented. Also, Nathan will be talking about the circular economy business case we're doing in the Northern Territory and how we'd like to engage with representatives from the room and stakeholders throughout the Northern Territory as we initiate that work. And I'd like to also thank Clinton for his presentation as well. I think, in a lot of the elements and the sentiments that he's presented there in terms of the nature and the market, some of the challenges that are faced in regional and remote areas, also the positive types of initiatives which are commencing in terms of the ban and the investment that we're seeing from Tyre Cycle, who are the largest tyre processing company in Australia, is representative of a shift, from some other companies as well in other parts of the country. So it's really positive to see that there's a lot of opportunities there. He touched upon the fact that crumb rubber consumption is increasing markedly in West Australia and Queensland. We'd love to see those same steps being taken in the Northern Territory. So that's part of the work that we'd like to cover. But, just to go back a step and just talk a little bit about TSA. TSA, Tyre Stewardship Australia, is a voluntary scheme, product stewardship scheme under the National Product Stewardship Act. What I will say is the scheme that we do implement is not designed by TSA, and it's not necessarily the model that we would start with from scratch. It's a collaborative process based on stakeholder engagement. We've come up with a voluntary model. That's the model that the federal government prefers. TSA is advocating for a more overt model. We would like to have more teeth, so to speak, and have participants compelled to contribute and participate in the scheme, but we're doing the best with the model that we have. We're a not-for-profit company set up to administer the scheme. We're funded from a 25-cent levy, which is paid when tyres are sold in Australia voluntarily by the companies that participate in the scheme, and I'll talk a little bit about those on the next slide. And just to be clear, TSA, we're not like Tyre Cycle. We're not like a tyre collection company. We don't come around and pick up tyres ourselves. We support and enable the market through core business activities, which I'll touch upon. And participation in the Tyre Product Stewardship Scheme is free, and it's paid for by the voluntary levy payment from the brands which we've surmised here: Bridgestone, Continental, Goodyear, Michelin, Kumho, Toyo, Yokohama and Pirelli are the original 8 tyre importer brands. But we also have Volkswagen and Porsche who also contribute. When they sell cars in Australia, they pay the 25-cent levy. So as I said, that 25-cent levy, which is voluntarily paid by these brands, and it's chosen not to be paid by other tyre brands, funds TSA around $4 million to undertake the work that we do. So one of the key elements of the work is accreditation and compliance. So we accredit around 1,700 retailers across Australia, some of which are in the Northern Territory. And what they do is they say, well, we will use collectors and recyclers, which are part of the Tyre product stewardship scheme, and such as Tyre Cycle or other collectors and recyclers that operate around the country. And they commit to do that. So with the funds, TSA audits all of the accredited entities, all of the recyclers annually. So if you're a local government, a council, when you're procuring Tyre services, what we'd say is to look for TSA accredited entities so that you use those as opposed to non-TSA accredited entities, because it means we visit their site, we audit them, we independently verify that the tyres that they're taking are going to end-of-life outcomes that are aligned with the objectives of the scheme, which would be more than likely aligned to what councils and other procurers would want to see from their collection of their tyres. And ultimately, if they're being collected by the right people, they have the opportunity to go to the right ends, which is being used productively in roads and the like. And you're more likely to get that capital investment from those accredited entities that can process those tyres into, ideally, as Clinton said, tyre-derived fuel might be the kind of lower end of the recovery supply chain, but there's more chance of it being put into local roads and the like also. And as I said, TSA also invests in the other side of the equation is we've invested around $6 million over the last 6 years. That's predominantly been my job at TSA for the last 6 years, is reinvesting the levy monies that we receive into enhancing markets for tyre-derived product. We spent around $3.5 million in the road sector, civil infrastructure, as it says there, $1 million, advanced manufacturing, looking at polymers. Just to touch upon, the roads work that we're doing, we've worked with most road authorities around the country to change specifications to make consumption of rubber in roads more readily accessible. Civil infrastructure, we've funded research into permeable pavements, explosive resistant buildings. Each of those initiatives can consume a couple of thousand tonnes of crumb rubber a year. If you've got multiple projects along those lines, that 15 to 20%, which is recovered locally, we ideally can push up substantially, as Clinton indicated, with Tyre Cycle and currently processing around 15,000 tonnes of crumb rubber, with the anticipation of looking at 45,000 tonnes of crumb rubber in the next 3 to 5 years is indicative of the change that's occurring. And TSA has been a fair contributor to that transformation of the market in the last couple of years. That's kind of the summary of TSA. And I suppose what I would say is that we understand that, we're in a market enabler and, which means we work within the existing kind of framework. And what we have realised is a lot of the activities that we do focus on is quite rightfully, to this point, it has been focused on where we can build upon what's already happening. And that is, unfortunately for the Northern Territory, where a lot of the recovery is happening in, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and the like. But, as I said, we've been going for 5 years now. We're looking further afield to understand how we can assist more effectively where recovery is not happening to the degree that it should in regional areas and remote areas like the Northern Territory. So we're expanding our remit. We're being more proactive in engaging in those zones. And one of the initiatives that we do have underway is what we're calling a regional circular economy business case. And some of the work or the ideas that were put across by Clinton about, what about the scales of viability in those areas? We're attempting to put a kind of an unbiased assessment of that by looking at the numbers and in regional areas. I won't go too much into it because Nathan will be talking about that in a moment. But I suppose what I'm saying is that we acknowledge that there's more work to be done. We're focusing on that currently, and we open this as an invitation for stakeholders to participate in that project. So I'll throw over to Nathan now to give a summation of the work that's happening and maybe try and fix the lighting.
Thanks, Sam. G'day everyone. My name is Nathan Tuvey. I'm one half of Urban EP. The other half is also dialed in. It's Nathan Mallon. Also zooming in from coastal Victoria. I'm Melbourne based, and we agree with Liam's sentiments around wishing we could be up there, enjoying your company, getting to see people face to face, and getting to see some of the various facilities and operations dotted around the landscape. So Urban EP, as mentioned, it's just the two of us, but although there's only two of us, we've got about 30 years combined experience in and around product stewardship, circular economy related matters. we largely bring in technical policy and economics perspectives based on our accumulated qualifications and work experience. So I guess for this work, as Liam has mentioned, it's a business case trying to take an impartial view of, I guess, the possibilities to engender an uplift in the recovery of tyres across the Northern Territory. And part of the work is really, I guess, stakeholder-driven, data-driven, and also trying to apply, I guess, a disciplined approach to what's realistic based on volumes, spread of materials, various institutional and industrial barriers along the way. So the work commenced about 2 months ago, and I think some of the people in the room have probably met us at least once to have a conversation around what's going on with respect to tyres in your vicinities, and we'd like to thank you for that past assistance, and hopefully we'll be able to touch base as we enter into the later phases of the work. So in a nutshell, it's a business case for the circular economy for used tyres in the Northern Territory. Key aspects of the work is really characterising the existing state of play, operations and practices with respect to how tyres are managed in the Northern Territory at the moment. So material flows, regulatory environment, policy outlook and commercial settings that affect what can and cannot be achieved under, I guess, business as usual arrangements. From there, testing the opportunity for alternative tyre management arrangements based on what could potentially be recovered and what's possibly viable in terms of different end markets interstate, potentially in Northern Territory. Based on understanding, I guess, what's viable and what's not viable and where key barriers may lie, the work will also look into what might be some supporting interventions led by various third parties, be it things that fit within TSA's typical remit or the involvement of the Territory government, other parties. Those are all things that are potentially in the mix around perhaps increasing the uptake of tyre recovery through measures that link in and respond well to existing barriers and gaps. Finally, while this is predominantly, I guess, an investigative and exploratory piece of work, we're conscious that in doing this work, we are speaking to a lot of people and testing a range of different ideas and possibilities with them. We see that by the time we exit the project and leave the findings in TSA's and partners' hands, we want there to be sufficient buy-in, understanding of the key problems and opportunities for those that have an interest and ambition to do more, to then jump ahead and continue the good work. Thanks, Ian. Thus far we have about 5 project stages. We've completed the first 2, first being initial project planning type work, making sure we really understand on what basis we want to reach out to different people and what the key bits of information we need to slot into the analysis. And we've completed a preliminary state of play. So basically what's going on with how end-of-life tyres are being managed across Northern Territory at the moment, what facilities are out there, what operations are underway, what level of stockpiling, both what you might call managed stockpiling and less managed stockpiling is currently occurring, and what is it that typical volumes that different regional local councils are dealing with at the moment. The work that we've completed at this particular point, we admit, we can see that the information that we've got is provisional at this point. We expect that throughout the project, as it continues, as we speak to more people involved in different aspects of tyre management, we will probably need to finesse our initial understanding, and that's just something we accept. And as we rattle through the remaining slides, if anyone has got some information which would allow us to improve our understanding and allow for a more accurate model, please get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to speak to as many people as we can and make sure that our findings are as representative as they can be with what's going on in Northern Territory and where the other possibilities lie. From here, we're looking to characterise and test alternative supply chains and end markets based on speaking to those that have a commercial interest in tyre recovery in the Northern Territory, or may potentially have an interest in future, depending on whether there's an alignment between their business model and operations and what Northern Territory has to offer. Again, investigating barriers and setting out corresponding responses involving participation from different parties, and then reporting and communicating key findings via TSA to project partners. So, as mentioned, thus far we've spoken to a lot of people and taken a lot of notes and started to build up that initial profile, now moving towards characterising potential supply chain options. We've spoken to a raft of local and regional council representatives, so again, thank you for your time. We're not done with that yet. We may end up reaching out to some people a second time, and we're always eager to talk to people a first time if you missed out the first time around. So on the left-hand side of the table there, those are the various local and regional councils we've spoken to thus far. Right-hand side, including Legant as a council representative body, but also other parties we've spoken to along the way. Multiple parts of the territory government. Tyre Cycle, thank you, Clinton, for your time some weeks back. Folks from ARC Recycling, Gumaja Regional Corporation, and for those that aren't aware, they basically provide waste management services for Nhulunbuy, and 4M Waste, which is a more recent startup in tyre recovery based in Western Australia. And we do have a few more conversations lined up, Rick Ralph next week, and hopefully a few more folk as well. So I don't know if this slide comes off that well, but it's basically a profile of what we understand to be tyre recovery operations in Northern Territory at the moment. Basically, from what we understand and based on previous work conducted by TSA around supply chains and arisings and fates of end-of-life tyres across the country, the estimate is that there's something in the order of about 4,900 tonnes per annum arising in the Northern Territory. Of those 4,900, the estimate is that about 1,600 or so comes out of off-the-road vehicles, mining, civil works and related types of vehicles with much larger tyres than elsewhere. We understand in speaking to councils, and we had to do some extrapolation, that something of the order of about 1,800 tyres is currently managed through regional local councils with tonnes, sorry. And the prevailing model seems to be, in some cases, it is stockpiled locally, in some cases shredded and disposed of to landfill locally, and in other cases, the material is basically freighted to the City of Darwin, where the Shoal Bay Waste Management Facility handles the material, largely involving, again, disposing in landfill. And we're aware through the operations of Tyre Cycle and other parties through retail outlets and some larger managers of vehicle fleets, some material of the order of about, as I understand it, 500 tonnes per annum is recovered through interstate logistical arrangements, sending down to Adelaide and the eastern states for recovery as tidal fuel and chrome rubber, largely paralleling information supplied by Clinton in the previous presentation. Our initial understanding of volumes of tyres managed across the territory suggests that something in the order of about 1,300 tonnes per annum, and these are annual figures as opposed to dealing with stockpiles tyres on an interim basis. About the order of about 1,300 tonnes per annum is dealt with through local and regional council facilities around the peninsula. In the northern centre, so we're talking Catherine, Roper, Gulf and Victoria Daily, the numbers are probably more around 150 to 170 tonnes per annum managed through council facilities. Barclay and Central Desert account for about the order of 180 tonnes per annum of end-of-life tyres, and Alice Springs and McDonald probably around the order of around 130 tonnes per annum. As I said, if anyone has any ideas around how we might improve these figures or be more refined in our understanding, please get in touch. We'd love to update our figures. The pink dots that you see on the left-hand side, where we understand to be major mining operations at the moment, but we understand that in future, there are significant plans for there to be more mining operations, say between Darwin and Catherine, and also around the Beetaloo Basin between Tennant Creek, south of Tennant Creek and towards Catherine. And this is quite interesting from the perspective of perhaps allowing a greater capture of off-the-road tyres into the recovery supply chains, and also potentially could end up signposting end markets to look at down the track. A big positive around those potential developments as well is that they seem to be largely clustered around the north-south Darwin to Adelaide corridors as well, which on the one hand might provide an opportunity around consolidation pathways for recovery in territory, so to speak, or alternatively find a pathway to easily get material interstate, be it in Adelaide or the eastern states. When trying to reconcile numbers that we gathered from talking to people on the ground, so to speak, and looking at the numbers provided through TSA's earlier work, there seemed to be something of the order of about 700 tonnes per annum, which we might describe as unaccounted for. A lot of, I guess, waste facility managers and council representatives pointed to relatively pervasive levels of dumping, abandonment of vehicles and associated tyres, and other relatively unmanaged and less preferred practices out there. And it might simply be that that's typically the amount of numbers across the amount of tyres across the territory that at the moment is poorly managed, and then might signal the opportunity to tighten up the regulatory environment and diminish that level of leakage of perfectly usable tyre resources from what could be good recovery markets. So looking into the next phase of work, looking to investigate further, and when you run these business case processes, you are normally comparing things to, I guess, a baseline or default conditions. And we'd say the baseline or default conditions in the Northern Territory at the moment would appear to be an ongoing reliance on disposal at the moment, with potentially a marginal lift in interstate recovery practices. We understand, obviously, it's a bit of a moving feast at the moment, but we'll do what we can to screw down some assumptions and settings that are reflective of the operating reality. And we also want to look at two scenarios, at least in very broad terms, one involving, I guess, augmented recovery via interstate processing capacity in end market that currently exists. And the alternative would be, well, are there some alternative end markets and supply chains that are more localized? So, for example, what potential is there to set up more processing capacity, not necessarily full supply chains? We could be talking about partial processing in the Northern Territory, which then either allows greater recoveries to be retained, greater value to be retained in the Territory, either through sending material to end markets within the Territory over coming years, should they evolve in time, should there be an emerging interest, or alternatively shipping material elsewhere. So in this coming phase, we'd really like to hear from Northern Territory stakeholders, local regional councils, Territory government, again, I'm sure, and also industry representatives, particularly around 4 different areas. Again, trying to improve our understanding of data, considering tyre volumes, also around commercial operating constraints that might inhibit or otherwise significantly influence what can be done in the Northern Territory. Perspectives around what you consider to be most valuable in a recovery solution. We know that anything that gets tyre material out of landfill is probably a good thing, but we need to understand a little bit better around, well, what other things are aspirations to consider and use as a basis to influence different stakeholders and potential partners up in the Territory. On that basis, we're also keen to understand what potential roles local and regional councils see themselves as playing in this space, and any other major concerns that you think need to be accounted for in the coming weeks as we progress our work. So that's really it in a nutshell, where we're from and where we're heading towards. Should you be in a position to reach out, talk a little bit further with us, our contact details are there. I'm Nathan Tuvey, the first name off the bat there, Nathan Mallon, whom we haven't spoken to yet in this capacity, though I'm sure many of you have spoken to him thus far through our previous interviews, can also be reached out. We're in touch on a day-to-day basis, so you speak to me, chances are Nathan will hear about it by lunchtime. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Can we have a round of applause to thank them? Were there any questions in the room for the guys? Anyone want to ask anything? Hold on a second. I'm just walking towards somebody for you.
Thank you for your presentation. It's a bit of a left field question, but with the enormous number of sort of bicycles and micro mobility vehicles, scooters, etc., I know the tyres are much, much smaller, but is there any attempt to do anything with tyres from all those other vehicles? Because there are still, I think, maybe more of them than there are vehicles on the road.
Look, I suppose there might be the tyres individually, but cumulatively, when you look at the kind of the volumes and the tonnages, it's fairly peripheral. I mean, it's probably actually a question for Clinton as much as anybody, but, you know, when you're talking truck tyres and, you know, obviously the passenger tyres, just one would be the equivalent of, I don't know how many, 8.5 kilos, you know, 10, 20 bike tyres. So, look, I'm sure the same recovery networks apply as to what can be done to recover them and utilise them productively. I'm not too sure. I know there are some, you know, we're in Collingwood here, so it's hipster central, as you can tell by us. But, you know,
lockdown, like stuff.
Yeah, lockdown, I suppose. But there are you know, recovery solutions which have been set up specifically in this area for bikes, bike shops and the like. But again, I'm not sure how applicable and that is for the Northern Territory. But Clinton might have an idea about the logistics associated with bike tyres and the like. I know that the motorcycle tyres are recovered. That's probably a step up from what you're referring to, though.
Any further questions in the room? No? In which case, can we please thank the guys for their presentation? Great. Thanks very much. We're going to turn that screen off now, I think. So take care, keep out of trouble, and good luck with the beards.
Thanks again.
Thanks all.